But as I said, we're committed to working to achieve a Palestinian state with the necessary guarantees for Israel's security. And we've been working on that, including as part of the potential normalization process between Israel and Saudi Arabia, something that we've intensely engaged on over the last several months and weeks. But our focus has been on, of course, making sure that Israel can effectively defend itself, but also de-escalating tensions.
The UN Security Council. The United States looks isolated yesterday. Your allies, close allies, France, Japan, and South Korea, both voted for admitting Palestine as a member.
The question goes to Olivia Gazis with CBS News.
Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, there is a lot to ask you about today, so with your indulgence. First, on Israel's strikes in Iran. Was the U.S. indeed alerted in advance? How far ahead of time? And did it raise any objections when it was? Are the strikes now over? And do you have any indication at this early stage via direct or indirect messaging that Iran will respond? And have there been any changes in Iran's nuclear program? On Israel, there are reports that your department has made recommendations to cut military aid to certain Israeli units for possible human rights violations in the West Bank before October 7th. Will you take action on those recommendations? And finally, on the recent U.S. assessments, you mentioned that China may be growing its support for Russia for its war effort in Ukraine. Do you believe that President Xi is sensing an opportunity amid flagging U.S. support to the Ukrainians? Thank you, sir.
Great. Thanks, Olivia. On the first question, the reports that you've seen, I'm not going to speak to that, except to say that the United States has not been involved in any offensive operations. What we're focused on, what the G7 is focused on, and again, it's reflected in our statement and in our conversation, is our work to de-escalate tensions, to de-escalate from any potential conflict. You saw Israel on the receiving end of an unprecedented attack, but our focus has been on, of course, making sure that Israel can effectively defend itself, but also de-escalating tensions, avoiding conflict, and that remains our focus. Again, I'm not going to speak to anything other than to say we were not involved in any offensive operations. With regard to the other questions, first, on China and Russia. Look, I think that what we're seeing is a product of the relationship between those two countries. You've heard them speak to it, including just before Russia's aggression against Ukraine. We've made very clear to China, and many other countries have as well, that they should not be supplying Russia with weapons for use in its aggression against Ukraine. We've not seen the direct supply of weapons, but as I said, what we have seen is not only the direct supply, but the critical supply of inputs, of components for Russia's defense industrial base, which is allowing two things. It's allowing Russia to continue the aggression against Ukraine. It's also helping Russia overall rebuild its defense forces and defense capacity that so much damage has been done to by the Ukrainians, but also by our sanctions and export controls. And that means that not only is Russia a current threat to Ukraine, it will remain an enduring threat to other European countries. And that's why I said China can't have it both ways. It can't purport to want to have positive, friendly relations with countries in Europe and at the same time be fueling the biggest threat to European security since the end of the Cold War. That was very clear from our conversations around the table. I believe Europeans have expressed that and will continue to express that clearly to China in the days and weeks ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. So on that, I think you're referring to the so-called Leahy law and our work under that. So this is a very important law, and it's one that we apply across the board. And when we're doing these investigations, these inquiries, it's something that takes time, that has to be done very carefully, both in collecting the facts and analyzing them. And that's exactly what we've done. And I think it's fair to say that you'll see results very soon. I've made determinations. You can expect to see them in the days ahead.
For the next question, Oliviero Bergamini with RAI TGI.
Good afternoon. Two quick questions. First, do you have the feeling that today's strike was limited so that Iran was not compelled to react? In that sense, are you optimistic about not a big war breaking out? And there is an Iran issue. Do you think that in the future, other countries like Italy that has historical ties with Iran could play a role in the de-escalation and stabilization that you mentioned?
Thank you. Well, two things. Again, I'm not going to speak to these reported events. All I can say is that for our part, and for the entire G7, our focus has been on de-escalation, on avoiding a larger conflict. And actually, that's been true since day one, after the horrific events of October 7th. A big part of our approach has been to prevent the conflict from spreading, to avoid escalation everywhere, and that's a common policy across the G7, and it's very much our approach now. So we've been engaged in efforts to avoid escalation. Those efforts will continue. Italy plays a critical role in this. As a leading country, as a country that's engaged around the world with many other countries that have their own relationships with countries involved in the Middle East. Italy has its own direct engagements, and I think what we've seen over the past 10 days or so, a couple of weeks, is that those engagements have been and remain very important to keeping things calm, to avoiding escalation, to preventing a larger conflict. Italy is an important player in this.
Nadia Bilbassi with Al Arabiya.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I want to press you again on the Iran question. It seems that both the Iranian and the Israeli responses were measured and calculated. Would you say that now we are averting a major confrontation and a possible war? And what messages would the U.S. played in sending to both sides for restraint? And are we back to the proxy war? And if you allow me on Rafah, the U.S. position is very clear. You oppose a military operation in Rafah as long as there's no plan to evacuate 1.5 million Palestinian civilians. The Israeli government is adamant to go ahead. What is your understanding of the plan now, and what is acceptable for the U.S.? And finally, on the UN Security Council, the United States looks isolated yesterday. Your allies, close allies, France, Japan, and South Korea, both voted for admitting Palestine as a member. The Israelis, including Netanyahu, on the record saying they oppose two-state solution. So what is the path forward, and what message do you give to Palestinians and to moderates in the region if you truly want to isolate extremists? Thank you.
Good. Thanks very much for the questions. Let me simply, first of all, repeat what our focus has been and what it remains. De-escalation, avoiding conflict, and so yes, calling on all concerned to exercise restraint. That's what we've been doing over the last couple of weeks, and as necessary, that's what we'll continue to do. And again, that's reflected in the statement that you'll see coming from all of the G7 countries. On Rafa, we have been very clear about this. President Biden's been very clear about this. We cannot support a major military operation in Rafa. First, there are currently somewhere around 1.4 million people in Rafa, many of them displaced from other parts of Gaza. In the first instance, it's imperative that people are able to get out of the way of any conflict. And doing that, getting people out of harm's way, is a monumental task for which we've yet to see a plan. And not only getting them out of harm's way, making sure that they can be supported with humanitarian assistance if they're out of harm's way. But second, even if people are largely out of harm's way, inevitably there's going to remain a pretty significant civilian population in Rafah. And we believe that a major military operation with a large presence of a civilian population would have terrible consequences for that population. We are committed, as Israel is, to ensuring that Gaza cannot be controlled by Hamas. We've seen the devastation and destruction that have resulted from Hamas's leadership and the actions that it's taken. And well before October 7th, what it was providing, or rather not providing, for the Palestinian people made clear that its concern had nothing to do with the Palestinian people and everything to do with its objectives to destroy Israel. So making sure that Hamas cannot repeat the events of October 7th, that's something that we're united in. But in terms of major military operations in Rafa, it's something that we don't support, and we believe that the objective can be achieved by other means. We've been engaged in conversations at senior levels with Israel over the past couple of weeks on this, including as recently as this week. Those conversations continue. Finally, on the UN Security Council resolution. First, we are committed, the United States is committed to achieving a Palestinian state. We believe that that is vital to having long-term, sustainable, durable peace and security. And of course, it's the only way to fulfill the aspirations, clearly not in the interests of anyone, including the Palestinians, particularly given the contributions we make to programs that are vital to them. But as I said, we're committed to working to achieve a Palestinian state with the necessary guarantees for Israel's security. And we've been working on that, including as part of the potential normalization process between Israel and Saudi Arabia, something that we've intensely engaged on over the last several months and weeks. So you can see an important path forward that's there. And in fact, we saw it in the wake of the unprecedented Iranian attack on Israel. You can see for Israel a future where a coalition of countries are working together to deal with the Iranian threat and to isolate it, with Israel that's integrated into the region, with normal relations with its neighbors, and a resolution to the Palestinian question, which is necessary to really deep root and achieve that coalition. That's an incredibly powerful future. It answers what Israel has long sought, which is to have normal relations throughout the region. It deals with the single biggest threat to Israel's security, and for that matter, to the security of most countries in the region, and our own, which is Iran and its proxies. But to get there, it's going to require calm in Gaza, and it's going to require a clear pathway to a Palestinian state. So we see that as one of the best ways to actually achieve results. Again, you can put something down on a piece of paper and wave it around. It has no effect. What does and can have an effect is actual diplomacy, working to achieve these agreements, and then delivering concrete results. That's what we're focused on. Finally, I would say this. Also take a look at the G7 statement today, which shows unity on this question. It says that there's going to be a proper time, a rightful time for recognition. This is not that time. We need to do the diplomacy, we need to do the hard work to bring parties together, to bring the region together, and to demonstrate that there's a much better future that awaits everyone if they follow this path.
And for the final question, Jessica Parker with BBC.
Thank you, Jessica Parker, BBC News. If I can first ask, why won't you address events that have happened overnight? Isn't it important that you do so? Can you tell us if you've spoken to your Israeli counterparts? And I'm interested to know how you would characterize the U.S. Israel relationship right now. And if I can, on Ukraine as well, hopes are obviously rising that the U.S. may pass this $60 billion aid package for Ukraine. But given the amount of time it's taken, given the situation in Ukraine, is it coming too late?
Good. So I'm going to be incredibly boring and not make your day by saying, again, I'm not going to speak to what's been reported, other than to say that the United States has not been involved in any offensive operations. The United States, along with our partners, will continue to work for de-escalation. On Ukraine, most important thing is getting this aid voted and moving it forward. And it will, I know, make a profound difference, and make a profound difference almost right away